Willkommen in einem Fragens video. Welcome to another exciting video, in this case episode 15 of my Star Trek original series episode breakdown video series. In this video I'll be looking at season 4 or season 1 of the animated series episodes 81 to 86 of Star Trek to identify historical references which can be used to determine the original history of the Star Trek universe. The episode order I'm using is the production order, and I'm following on from the original series, assuming that the two seasons of the animated series represent season 4 and 5 of the original series. In order to understand the development of the history or vision, we need to study the episodes in the order that they were written. While I'm uncertain of the exact writing order, the production order is about as close as I can confirm. The episode order information as broadcast is also included. Special thanks to the transcripts which can be found on the Chakotay site. When Gene Roddenberry created Star Trek back in 1966, he had a vision which remained basically consistent. When the Next Generation was released in 1987, Gene's vision had changed, and the past needed to change in order to be consistent with Gene's new vision. This video series will look at the original vision of Star Trek, starting with the earlier source material. Any historical facts from later sources which contradict the earlier references will assume to be an error, for this video purpose anyway. Minor changes in nomenclature can be excused. More Tribbles, More Troubles is the 5th episode of Season 4, which is the first season of the animated series. By convention, it was considered the 81st episode produced. Its star date is 5392.4 and its original air date was 6th of October 1973. In the episode, Sherman's planet is mentioned. This was first mentioned in Season 2, Episode 5, and was a planet co-colonized with the Klingons. In this episode, the Klingons employ a new weapon, a projected status field, which disables the anti-managed generators, phasers, and photon torpedoes. This weapon apparently uses a lot of power and is not practical as a, usable weapon system, but it takes a little while for the Enterprise to discover this. Cyrano Jones trades in spice and flame gems. I'm guessing there is a planet or system called Spicer. I have to also guess this is a non-Federation alien planet or system. We don't get really much information in this episode. It seems the famine continued on Sherman's planet and the Klingons have developed a new weapon, which is not that useful. I'll ignore all the Tribble biology information as I don't consider it that significant in terms of determining Star Trek timelines. The Infinite Vulcan is the 7th episode of Season 4, which is the first season of the animated series. By convention, it was considered the 82nd episode produced. Its star date is 5554.4 and its original air date was 20th of October 1973. In this episode, the Enterprise discovers a new planet at the periphery of the galaxy. I assume this must be either the north or south edge of the galactic plane. The planet has green sky, extraordinary elegant curved rock formations, building with vegetation growing on them. There is an electric probe on this planet defending one of the buildings. The planet is inhabited by a plant-based intelligent life, which was infected by a disease brought to the planet by a human called Kendlicus. The civilization is more advanced than the Federation. Stavros Kennicus, a survivor of the Eugenics War, brought the disease to Pylos. Kennicus clones himself, apparently, in order to survive. According to this episode, Kennicus is over 250 years old, which means he was born maybe in 2117 AD, which cannot be correct. The Eugenics War occurred about 270 years ago, 273 to be exact, so Stavros Kennicus must be closer to 300 years old. McCoy did say over 250 years, so we could stretch it, we can accept it, I suppose. Key takeaways is we're introduced to a new planet, an alien civilization called Pylos. It's on the edge of the galaxy, north or south edge, I would guess, and it's more advanced than the Federation. A survivor of the Eugenics War manages to get to the planet. His name is Stavros Kennicus, and he must be about 300 years old. The way he survives is he simply clones himself. Yesteryear is the 2nd episode of Season 4. It was the 83rd episode produced. Its star date is 5373.4 and its original air date was 15th of September 1973. In this episode, we learn the Guardian of Forever is on the planet Vortex. During a trip, Spock disappears from history and an Andorian called Thelian becomes the first officer. In this version of history, or alternate timeline, Thelian, the Andorian first officer, has been the first officer for 5 years, which means he joined the episode Enterprise in 2262. While on the Guardian of Forever's planet, Kirk had been exploring Orion in its distant past. Orion has several planets. I assume the one being visited contained an extinct ancient civilization. There is also an alien inhabited planet which could have been studied as well. The Earth colony at Orion would have been uninhabited at the time, so why bother? In this version of reality, Sarek has been ambassador to 17 different Federation planets. In this version of reality, Spock was killed at the age of 7 during the Vulcan maturity test. This was from 20 to 30 years prior. I'm assuming 30 years, otherwise Spock would be far too young. If Spock died 30 years ago, then Spock is 37 years old, which means he was born in 2229 AD or 2230 AD, which means Spock is younger than Kirk by possibly 1 to 2 years. Spock had dedicated himself to Starfleet in 2247, which means he would have been 17 or 18 years of age at the time. This is rather young, but if Spock was 18, it's possible. Thus, 2229 AD is probably the more reasonable date of his birth. Memory Alpha claims he was born in 2230 AD, based on a deleted scene from the Star Trek The Motion Picture movie. The movie comes after the animated series, so I would have to assume the animated series is more accurate in terms of the value. Nonetheless, it's either 2229 AD or 2230 AD, and Spock is definitely younger than Kirk. The year Spock died was the Vulcan year 8877. This is either 2236 or 2237. While we have an idea of Spock's birth date already, this is confirmed to be either 2229 or 2230, which is very close to Kirk's year of birth. We learn the planet which holds the Guardian of Forever is called Vortex, and we also learn the Federation is using it to do historical research, which I consider to be extremely dangerous. Beyond the Farthest Star is the first episode of Season 4. It was the 84th episode produced. Its star date is 5221.3 and its original air date was 8th of September 1973. While on a mission to investigate Quasar M17, the Enterprise is pulled into orbit around a massive object, most likely a black hole. While in orbit around the black hole, the Enterprise discovers a very large alien spacecraft. The craft is transmitting a radio signal. The ship has been in orbit for slightly more than 300 million years. It has a malevolent life form on it, which manages to get on the Enterprise. The key takeaway from this episode is the existence of a very advanced civilization 300 million years ago. The Survivor is the 6th episode of Season 4. It was the 85th episode produced. Its star date is 6143.3 and its original air date was 10th of October 1973. During this episode, we discover a new planet called Serenus. As McCoy's daughter was going to school on the planet, it was likely an Earth or human planet. It suffered a famine 10 years prior in 2257. Apparently, McCoy has a daughter who was going to school 10 years ago. If she was 16 years old in 2257, she would have been born in 2241. It could have been up to 6 years later, but as I have no idea McCoy was even married, this is a reasonable guess and is where I'm going to pin my flag to. We also discover another planet, Vendor. This is an alien planet which is not part of the Federation and later we discover is quarantined. Carter Winston, who was famous, crashed on the planet 5 years previously. Carter Winston, who apparently is someone that was well known in the Federation, a philanthropist, someone who did lots of good stuff, crashed on that planet 5 years previously, which would make it 2262. We also discovered the inhabitants of Vendor are quarantined because they can shapeshift, and that's considered a bad thing. Key takeaways from this episode is we discovered 2 new planets, Tribbles and Vendor. We also discover McCoy has a daughter. Obviously he must also have a wife, perhaps? The Lorelei Signal is the 4th episode of Season 4. It was the 86th episode produced. Its star date is 5483.7. Its original air date was 29th of September 1973. In this episode we discover the Federation lost their first ship at the Taurian system in 2117. I expect this was an early exploration ship. Apparently, lots of ships have gone missing in this area in the past. Within the Taurian system, we discovered that there is an inhabited planet. Planet 2 in the Taurian system contained a vast civilization which looked like it was in decline. It was inhabited by humanoid females, which are obviously alien, but certainly not very alien. In this episode, the aged Kirk, McCoy and Spock beam up to the Enterprise using the transporter, and that allows them to return their bodies to their former young self. Apparently, this is a risky long shot, which of course works, otherwise the series would end at this episode. The year the Taurian system was colonized, or the planet in the system was colonized, is unknown, but it must have been a long time ago. So long, some form of evolution had to occur which allowed the women to survive. How they survived before the humans, Romulans and Klingons arrive is unknown. Perhaps Vulcan or other spacefaring races were their targets or prey. Evolution takes a long time normally, but could have been sped up perhaps in a few hundred years through technology. My wild guess is about 300 years. This is the shortest. Anything longer and the women may well have gone mad or been so different from other normal people that they could not understand normal mortal life and would have no desire to go back to that life. Key takeaway from the episode is we discover another declining civilization, in this case in the Taurian system. It's outside the Federation and is clearly alien. The inhabitants relocate to a Federation planet so they can live a normal life. Many of the later Star Trek movies and shows do not align with the original vision of the series. This is common in real history as late historians attempt to change the past to justify their new beliefs in the present. As I personally enjoyed the original vision of Star Trek, I would hope future movies and TV shows would go back to its original roots, but I doubt that'll ever happen. This concludes episode 15 of my Star Trek, the original series episode breakdown video series, in this case covering what I call Season 4, episodes 81 to 86, but in reality is Season 1 of the animated series. Alle guten Dingen, kommen zu einem Ende.